Hello and welcome to Two Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Katie Truax,
And I'm Claudia Glassman.
and today we are going to be answering some of the most commonly asked questions people have for therapists.
That's right. That's right. So, do we just want to jump into them so we can
Yeah, I think so. What's the first one?
let's do it. Does my therapist care about me?
Ooh, that's loaded. Okay, let's just dive straight into the good stuff, shall we?
Let's. That's an interesting one because I think people feel like, understandably so, because we get paid for what we do, right? Like I've had clients be like, well, you get paid to listen to me. And it's like, but I still choose to do this work because I enjoy it. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting dynamic because we get like there's a monetary exchange for our services, right? So I think people are like, well, you have to like me, but that's not
Mm.
true. We do not.
So,
Or you have to care about me, but I do care about my clients. Like I genuinely do this job because I want people to feel better and just feel better and be better, you
right,
know?
right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think the second we stop caring about our clients, we probably should, consider a career change.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that word care is really loaded. Like, I feel like you did a beautiful job of answering that, like on a surface level. And then there's so many more like ways we could like look into that, you know? I mean, I know one of the things that I've heard from other people considering this career are questions around like, how do we do this? You know, how do we hear so much all the time? How do we not take it home? You know, and I do think that that probably is maybe one of the unique boundaries of being a therapist is that we do care and should care, to your point, right? During that 50-minute time frame, right? Like we should probably 24/7, 365 want good things for our clients, right? But then it's unique about this job that we really only focus on that for 50 minutes a week, right? And then when that 50 minutes is over, that person is out the door, a different one comes in, and then the care shifts to them.
Yes,
And
right.
we, I think most good therapists and most seasoned therapists have to learn not to take clients home. Now, that doesn't mean like I know for me personally, you know, I do have thoughts of clients often like when my body is busy, but my mind is idle. So like,
That's another question. Does my
yeah,
therapist think about me between sessions?
yeah,
You
I
do.
do. I do. And not
Mhm.
all my clients I do. You know, I have clients who come to me for many different reasons, but sometimes I'll think about clients that I haven't seen for a while. Some I have a couple of handfuls of clients who kind of come to me like as needed, you know, like PRN, if you will. You know, they just kind of reach out when they want me and want a session. And sometimes if I go for a while without talking to them, I will think of them and wonder how they're doing or wonder if I'll hear from them. Or if I know something's coming up, let's say like the holidays right now, right? Like I wonder about so and so and what's happening with her family, right? And I also sometimes think about my more challenging clients between sessions too, to moments like dishes or laundry or shower, you know,
Yeah,
kind of.
because we're problem solving to some
Uh-huh.
extent or processing or, sometimes I think about clients a lot if I'm like reading something like related to work, right? Like
Yeah.
therapy based. And I'm like, oh, this would be so helpful for that client. Or I stumble across a book or something in my searches for something else. And I'm like, that would be helpful for the client.
Mhm.
So like I think sometimes it can be spontaneous, like, or even
Yeah.
when something happens in another session, I'm like, oh, that might be helpful for, and I like that sparked an idea for another person, right? So I mean, I definitely think people like our clients come up for us in between sessions. And I know you and I, will staff cases together or whatever. That's like in between sessions, right? Like yeah, I mean, it's not a job that just like necessarily turns off and we never think of it. I think we're dealing with people, and just the nature of what we do, there's an energetic exchange between two people. There's a relationship, right? Like, and it doesn't dissolve, but I definitely think like therapists compartmentalize, right? Like if I'm in one client for this 50-minute session and I have to move to another one right after, like I have to disconnect from one person and give the next person my full focus.
Yeah.
So there is definitely some of that, but I mean, I don't think there's any, hopefully no therapist that's like, I don't care about my clients and, want the best for them. If that is your therapist, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So a lot of these questions are relationship based, which is interesting to me. Another question is, actually, somebody asked me the other day, what happens if it was someone I work out with, so not a client or anyone that I connect with on that level, but he was like, well, what happens if you don't like a client? He's like, because I know in my job, sometimes I don't like people I work with,
Yeah, that's a
and
good one.
it's interesting because my response was like, I can usually, even if someone's having a challenging behavior with me, I can usually see beyond that to like the reasons behind it. Like part of what we do is dive into people's stuff, and I also think like a lot of times, like not every client likes me either, right? And we kind of talked about that in a previous podcast. And that's okay because it's a relationship. And I find that usually it's not my dislike, but maybe it's just not a good fit. I think like, I don't think it's like I don't like you, right? It's just like, maybe we're just not the best fit together. But I think there's a lot of focus on therapists and the relationship with therapists that clients want to know about, which I find interesting because those are the questions, right? Like, do you take your work home? Do you think about people in between? Do you get attached to your clients? Right? Like that was another question that kind of popped up on this list is
well, it makes sense to me. I mean, it's a very vulnerable place for a client to be in.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, I have been in therapy myself, and I often remember, at least the first go around, I was younger and thinking of kind of some of these things myself, like my first attempt at being a client, right? And I was a therapist at the time, a new therapist, but being the client for the first time, I'm glad I had that experience because it taught me so much about what's truly therapeutic about being in therapy. And I think that depending on what you're going for, right? Like, and we've talked about this before, sometimes therapy is more didactic, behavior based, like prescriptive, if you will, things like anxiety or sometimes depression. Sometimes people come specifically wanting coping skills, and that's less relationship based. But I think that if clients come in with relationship issues or trauma, specifically relationship based trauma, it's very, very important to feel that the client therapist relationship is stable and secure. And that when I sit on that couch across from my therapist, he or she is thinking good things about me and understanding me and being empathetic and validating my experience and not invalidating my experience. And that can sometimes be a fine line to walk, but I think is probably why a lot of these questions are coming up, right? Because it's vulnerable. People are coming in, they're sitting on our couch, they've never met us before, and they're pouring their hearts out, right? Their deepest, darkest, if they're doing it right, and needing that reassurance that you do care about me and you do think good things about me and that you're not judging me based on what I just shared with you, or feeling weird about me or feeling like I am a bad person because of what I've just shared with you.
Right. Well, I think that's what it comes down to, right? Is, are you judging me?
Yeah.
For the way I present, for the things I do, right? And you answered one of the questions, because one of the questions that comes up a lot is too, is do therapists go to therapy? And now I can't speak for every therapist under the sun, but I can say that in our field, it is considered good self-care to at least dabble in therapy every now and then when you need. I know part of my graduate school program is we had to go get therapy. Now it was kind of done on the honor system because they can't, confirm that you did or didn't.
Right.
But most people did. And I agree with you. I would say that early experience, I wasn't in the field yet because I was still in graduate school at that time. But I remember that therapist, and I just thought about it now as you were speaking. I felt so invalidated.
Ooh, you did.
Yeah, because I was saying that I felt like something was a problem, and she was basically like, "Yeah, I don't get that." Not in those words. That's how I took it.
Yeah.
So I think maybe looking back, maybe she was trying to normalize something, but I felt like, well, then why the hell am I paying you, and why am I here if you don't even think that what's bothering me is clearly not, like, you don't want to go there, So
Yeah.
yeah, I haven't thought about that in a while, but it definitely like stuck with me of things I don't do to clients is, tell them the problems are irrelevant. And she did not say that, so I don't want to, but that is the feeling I got. And I went for I stuck with her for a little bit, and I never got past that. But yes, your therapist is not necessarily in therapy consistently for like 40 years, but we, as a field, move in and out of therapy and get our own support when needed, because we can't do this job if we can't sort out our own stuff, right? And so I think for us, we have to be able to contain things for our clients. And if we're overwhelmed and can't contain our own stuff, then we're really not so great in the room with clients either, right?
Definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I, yeah, I think that this is going to be a sweeping statement, and it's not always the case, but I think that the most, I would say, the majority of the best therapists out there, right? Because I don't want to be absolutist, but the majority of the best therapists out there have been through some sort of pain or struggle in their own lives and have gone through therapy or something very similar, of significant value to do healing work around that. I think that sometimes you'll find a therapist who has not been through hard things and that's rare, right? And I think sometimes you find therapists who have been through hard things and have been able to get through those hard things using internal resources, support from peers, and so forth and so on. And I think that that's also rare. I think more often than not, most therapists who are practicing have been through hard things and have gotten some professional support of some sort or another around that. And that's probably why they made you do that in grad school. That wasn't a requirement of my grad school, but it was suggested to me by one of my supervisors, which is really interesting because when I was younger, I had some pretty firmly entrenched perfectionism drives, right? And I got really kind of emotional when I would feel like I wasn't doing things perfectly, which is impossible as a therapist, right? There's no such thing as perfection.
Right.
And so one of my supervisors early on saw that in me, and he suggested, or he actually gently asked, had I considered doing therapy of my own? And then he thought that might be helpful for me. And I took him up on it and did it for a long time because I needed it. um, but yeah, so I think that I think it's just a beautiful, therapy is a beautiful thing. And it's great to be able to provide it as a clinician, and it's great to be able to receive it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there's even therapists that specialize in only working with therapists, right? And so it's it's common enough that that's even a, subcategory of therapists that are just kind of
Ooh,
specialized in providing support for other therapists. Yeah,
that's cool.
it is cool. Um, okay, so, oh, this is a good one.
You got a good one.
Hmm. How do I tell my therapist something hard or embarrassing?
Mm-hmm.
I love this one because there is not a whole lot I think someone could say to me that would catch me off guard. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if my clients recognize that. Like,
Right.
as many people as I talk to, as many things as I've heard, like, there's not a lot that I'm like, oh my God, like I just,
Mhm.
but I understand from someone's perspective, if they're trying to share that information, that it's like, oh, this is embarrassing or this is really hard to talk about. For me, it's just conversations that I have, right? It's like,
Right.
but I understand from a client's perspective, not knowing the details of what other
Mhm.
people share with us clearly, right? Thinking like, oh my God, what if they've never heard this before? And
Mhm.
most of the time, I don't know, I rarely hear something I'm like, never heard that before, right?
Right.
Um, I think if you have questions about if there's a I should tell my therapist this, but it's really hard to say, I think that's probably a good indicator that you should tell them. Like
Mm-hmm.
something that's nagging at you that's like, I want to tell my therapist, but then I think if you feel that nagging feeling, it's probably something that's important for your therapist to know because
Which
it's
makes
weighing on
me,
you.
because I think about the last time this happened for me, and it was fairly recent, I would say, in the grand scheme of things. Within the past several months, I started a new client, and it was probably session 2. And I remember feeling like session 1, like the presenting concerns she shared were relatively benign, you know, and people come to therapy for different reasons. Not everybody needs therapy because they're like in acute crisis, right? Or there's something really screaming loudly. And it seemed like that was the case for her, that she was just kind of more on like a personal growth, self-care journey. And then session number 2, she told me the real deal, right?
Yeah.
And I remember after session number 2, well, I think she opened up saying that she had not shared because she was afraid that um I might judge her or disagree with what she was going to share. It's a kind of a divisive topic, and anyway, so she ultimately did share, and I, like, to your point, right? Because yes, there's not much under the sun that we haven't heard. Now, we'll come back to that, I think, because it's important. There's, to me, in my experience, there have been 2 things that make that true for me. Well, 3. And that those 3 things are not the same for all therapists. So maybe we should dig into that just a tiny touch. But in her case, I did reassure her after the fact that no, that what she had shared was not something that was unusual for me to hear, or that I had any sort of negative bias against, that it was something I was completely comfortable working with and fully accepted her around. And she was like, oh, thank God. I'm
Yeah.
so glad.
But okay, so yeah, so I think this is an interesting conversation
Mhm.
because the therapists in my world that I work with and those that I supervise are pretty open-minded, and I think there's a lot of acceptance. I
Mhm.
do, however, and I think that's what a therapist's role should be, right?
Yeah.
But when I think about those that maybe do therapy from a different lens or framework, maybe that answer is different, right? Like if you're a Christian counselor or a
Sure.
pastoral, right, and you're doing mental health work from there, depending on what the views of the place you represent might be, like how do you respond to someone that comes in and says, I'm identify as queer, or I identify as trans, or I identify as fill in the blank.
Right.
I wouldn't skip a beat to that,
Right.
right? Okay, well then, right, on we go. But I do wonder if there are certain, I've had clients years ago. I
Mhm.
had a client ask me if I was a Christian counselor, and I said, no. Is that something you're looking for? And she was like, no, I was going through a divorce and I wanted counseling and was basically told I couldn't get divorced, even though it was an abusive relationship, because
Yeah.
it goes against, and so she was actually looking for someone who didn't hold that view. Like she wanted to switch gears. But I think there may be a situation, right? Again, for some therapists where that is, maybe there are things that are hard to share and may be viewed with bias. Right? It was like,
Mm-hmm. Now, I know I have some biases. I have a client who's going to counsel or not counseling. She's in grad school right now to become a therapist. And oh gosh, what was the term that her school taught her for this? It was one that I had not heard before. But basically, it was a term that referred to what baggage therapists bring into session, right? So essentially, like we're trained to be blank slates, right? We're trained to challenge our own beliefs, be aware of our own beliefs, be aware where they intersect with what the work that we're doing with our clients. And I don't know, this is my opinion, Claudia, you might have a different one, but to the extent that we're able, kind of delete most of them, right? And be like non-judgmental. And when I say that, I use that term kind of in the way that Marsha Linehan uses it, who's the founder of DBT, which not judgmental in a way of saying like this is bad, but this is good or bad, right? And more of like having, and it is what it is. And I see you, I hear you, I accept you, whatever it is, mentality around what comes into our offices. And I feel like at this age and stage in my life, I have whittled down to maybe like a couple things that I really like can't delete as far as my own belief system around like the things that really like irk me in other human beings. And so therapists aren't blank slates per se. Now, I'm aware that as I continue to age, I might mellow out more and more, or maybe not. Maybe I'll just get more feisty and opinionated as I get older. I don't know. But I know I have mellowed with age and I have less opinions about less things now than I did when I was younger. But there are still some holdouts there, where even as therapists, I do have some bias.
well, we're human, right? And like,
are.
But yeah, I mean, and that's where like, professional organizations say if that bias stands in the way of you being able to help someone, then you need to refer them out. Right.
Mhm.
And, I think those show up in different areas. I know therapists that had infidelity in their marriage and had to take a break from working with couples where infidelity was a thing because it struck so close to home that they were doing their work around that they had to stop doing that work because it came up for them so personally and they couldn't separate, they couldn't do therapy around that. So like those things happen. And then you refer out because you're not going to be effective. But I know clients that like, and in the last several years, they'll be like, well, I don't know where you stand politically, and then there's almost like twinge of like embarrassment as they share their stance. It doesn't matter where I stand politically.
Right.
In this moment, irrelevant. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that stuff comes up, or I don't know what you think about this, but this is how I feel about X, Y, and Z, but, and those are the moments where I'm like, it's fine. It doesn't matter where I stand or how I feel, with certain things, especially some divisive topics, but I get it from like a client's point of view. They have no idea where we stand. So they make one of two assumptions. Maybe we're the opposing side, or they assume we just agree with them. Right. But I think the issues that I think really are hard to put aside there's not that many for me, right? No. All right, I've got 2 more questions. I think we can get them in. Can I be friends with my therapist after therapy?
No.
No. You cannot. Legally, ethically, I think ethically we cannot have dual
5 years, right?
Is that what it's like 5 years for you to, yes. But I don't think that's even a friendship. I guess that is it.
really, like after 5 years, they're not going to remember us anyway.
Yes, we take, by our ethical standards, we are not supposed to have dual relationships, and so we're not allowed to be friends with our clients. And that has to do with like power dynamics and the things we know about each other. But I mean, I can tell you honestly, I have clients that I'm like, I'd be friends with you if we met under different circumstances.
Totally.
You know, I can't be friends with you ethically, but like, yeah, I definitely have clients that I'm like, you're a cool person, you know? I mean, again, it goes back to like, do you like your clients, and do you have, we do have a relationship with them. We get to, you know, kind of hear what people are really about and how they really tick. And I definitely have clients that I'm like, I'd be your friend, you know? But we are not in that place. And so
No.
I cannot. Actually, I think I have a lot of clients that I would be friends with.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have a lot of like great people on my caseload that I'm like, I'd be friends with you, you know? We can't be friends.
No, we can't.
Um, no, but I think like, I don't know, do you have that too, where you're just like, I'd be friends with you?
Yeah, definitely a couple.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. And sometimes I'm like, damn, like I wish you hadn't started with me because I really like you. But
Yeah.
no. And
And
then
you live in a small town, so I
I do live in a small
imagine
town.
it's
Yeah.
easier for me. I mean, like there's, you know,
Mhm.
so
Yeah,
many therapists and
it is a
people.
little different in a small town. Not I don't I am more relaxed with boundaries around like other service providers in my town because of the fact that I do live in a small town, right? And I remember learning this in grad school. And at the time, I went to grad school in Atlanta, and I had a hard time even imagining this. But kind of this idea of like, well, and these are the ideals, right? These are the ethical standards, and yet this is often different in a small town. And I kind of remember hearing that and then like just glazing over it, right? Because I lived in a big city. And then now here I am in a small town, and I'm like, ooh, like I see my clients everywhere. And there have been times when I have not an existing client, but a former client, like within that 5 year window where I have needed to utilize somebody's professional services. And it's always tricky. And I remember learning in grad school about bartering, which is not the same as kind of what I just described. But I remember that the dilemma is, okay, so what if you get into a relationship with somebody and either they're unhappy with you or you're unhappy with them, right? And then what do you do? And how does that dilute the therapy relationship and so forth and so on? And I always kind of use that as a kind of a check and a balance for myself. But it is really interesting being in a small town. I mean, we could talk for days about that, but I know we won't because there's so much that's different
Yeah.
for me practicing here than when I practiced in Atlanta. Like, and it's wild, but that's like a conversation for a different day.
Right, because you bump into your clients in the world. Your
Everywhere.
clients probably on some level, you probably have several clients that know one another and have, right? Like you structure your practice differently when there's not a
Yeah.
lot of options out there. Like if you need to get your car fixed and your,
Right.
you know, client is the
Yeah.
mechanic, like,
I mean, I literally was shopping, Christmas shopping for my husband yesterday, and I got to the checkout counter, and it was a store, and they're like, "Oh, do you have our rewards?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And she goes, "Well, what's your phone number?" And I told her my phone number, and she put it in her little system, and my name popped up, and she goes, "Oh my God." She was like, "You're Katie Truax." She was like, you're the therapist, right? I'm like, yes. And I'm so glad I showered today.
oh yeah, it's different. It's different. Okay. So what does the question is, does my therapist have to report suicidal thoughts or if I'm suicidal?
Okay, you're
Um,
totally taking us out with a bang. We've got like what, 5 minutes left?
well, I have two questions I could squeeze in, but we'll see how long this, and then and I guess that's a good question is like, then what do we have to report? Cause that's always helpful. And then I have one more question after that. It's how do I break up with my therapist? So those are the two.
Oh.
Yes. Okay. So do we have to report suicidal thought, if I'm suicidal? So the question was suicidal thoughts.
Mhm.
So I think, did we talk about this yet in this podcast?
I
This
don't
might
think
just be a
so.
conversation you and I have had,
Mhm.
not
You probably
online.
talk to your supervisees about this a lot.
Yes, because suicidal thoughts versus a plan and intent are not the same thing. So I have a lot of clients that have like fleeting suicidal thoughts and have,
Yeah.
what we call ideation,
Mm-hmm.
thoughts of, I wish I wasn't here anymore. What if I just wasn't, right? But they don't have a plan, a means of doing it, any intention. It's just this like thing that floats through their mind. Um, that is not something we report. We report when you're in danger, basically, right? So if there's a plan or intent,
Yeah.
we will call your emergency contact. That is why we ask for that. And if that person is not available, we will call someone else to come
Mm-hmm.
help you. I know I've gotten phone calls early on in my career. I got a phone call of someone who was gesturing suicide, and I called 911 and sent them to their house because I was like not nearby and can't really do much if you're hurting yourself. I don't even know if they were home, but I sent them to where I thought they were.
Yeah.
They hung up on me before I get their address. So in certain cases, we do report that. Katie, what else do we get to report?
I have 3 new ones today. So I said this 2 times already, and I'll say it again at 4 o'clock. But so I tell people that as a mandated reporter, I'm legally obligated to, if I ever hear, this is how I say it, if I ever hear from anybody that any child, elderly person, or somebody who's mentally or physically disabled is being abused or neglected, I have to break confidentiality to report that to the authorities who are there to help those people. And if I'm ever concerned that you, my client, are going to leave my office and take your life or take somebody else's life, I have to break confidentiality to try to keep you or that other person alive.
That is right. That's
Yay!
yes, yes. Or if we get dragged to court,
That's right.
then confidentiality, if we
Uh-huh.
have a court order that we have to go to court, then we don't get to keep things confidential anymore because now the courts trump that
That's right.
and make us talk.
Or even if a judge were to order us to release records, the same complies because the judge's decree supersedes our privacy laws.
That's right.
But you know what? I have never had that happen.
Me neither. I just knocked on wood. I have not
knock on wood every single time I say that because I do. That's kind of what when I finish what I just shared with you, I say the exact same thing, and then I'll say, but in almost 15 years of practice, I've never had that happen. I literally knock on my little wooden table every single time.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's not typical. And I've had calls from attorneys.
That's right.
Asking, and I would always say, well, if I release certain things, it reflects on both parties, right? Because usually it's custody stuff for me when I work with kids. And so like if one parent's asking, like no parent is 100% perfect. So, if you open this door, like, please understand that then everything comes out. And then usually that's enough for people like, yeah, we'll just leave you out of it, right? Because if you're opening the confidentiality door and I get dragged to court, I have to answer questions for both sides, right? So it gets a little messy, but luckily that is not the norm in my, it happened a lot more when I was doing Department of Children and Family cases because there was a lot more court stuff involved, but in private practice, it's been less so. Okay, real quick, we're going to end with how to break up with your therapist.
This is like perfect ending for our podcast, right?
Yeah.
How to break up.
So I think most people just start ghosting their therapist, they like cancel an appointment and disappear because it's easier that way.
Yeah. I often see what I have happen more often than not these days is people will come and then they don't really have that much to talk about.
But do you feel like because I mean, it's run its course.
Like if you're done,
right?
Yeah, if you're done, like if you have finished therapy, right?
Yeah, and that happens to me a lot. Or clients be like, I'm good for now. Like I'm feeling good. The things we started working on, like I feel like I got a handle on it. That's what I want. Like I want you to feel good and be like, we're done, right? Like this is not meant. It doesn't have to be a lifelong relationship. And I get a lot of that, right? Like I'm feeling good now. I don't feel like I need this, but like I'll call you if I do. And then sometimes people pop in every few months just to do a check-in, or if something happens in their life, they'll pop back in. But like that's we expect that. We don't necessarily expect every client to be a forever client, right? Like you come in with the goals of what you want to work on. We work on those. And when you feel done, you feel done. And usually we pick up on that too, right? Like we know when the intensity changes of what we're doing. I think sometimes I bring it up first. Like, how are you feeling? Do you feel like you've kind of gotten what you wanted out of this? Because I start to notice, I'm going to call it a lull maybe in like sessions, or, you know, do you feel like I'm still helpful? Do you feel like you still need this? Do you want to, you know, like do longer between sessions? So I do bring it up a lot.
Me too. I feel like it usually comes more from me than from them, but same in response to things shifting, changing, slowing down. If I say, you know, what do you want to use your time for today? And they're like, I don't know.
Right. Right. And yeah. And I think, you know, I start most of my sessions, you know, and I tell people off the bat, like, if something comes up, either an issue comes up that I'm not your best fit for, right? Or like, I don't do a lot of work around eating disorders, right? So say someone divulges that information, I would probably be like, let me send you to someone who like knows this better than I do, right? And this is their thing. Because it's a little more nuanced, right? So I tell people, like, if something comes up that I'm not the best fit for, I will help you find someone. If you just are like, this relationship's not working for me, again, it's a relationship, right? Then let me know and we can talk about it and we can find someone else or work through it if it's something we can work through, right? But it's all really part of the therapy process.
Yeah.
So how would you like to be broken up with? What would your ideal?
I don't want to be broken up with at all. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, ideally, right? I mean, yeah, because therapists have feelings too, but ideally, I would love to see the relationship run its course, right? And to get to that point where the issues are resolved and that need is lessened. And it's kind of like a graduation of like, it seems like you're doing really well, you know? And, you know, I do the same thing. What are you thinking you want to do about scheduling? Do you want to space things out a little bit more? Do you want to kind of not put something on the books and let me know when you need me and we can put something on the books when that time comes? You know, and then clients decide. They'll say, let's do 2 weeks, or let's do 3 weeks, or let's do a month, or 6 weeks, or yeah, I'll text you, right? And I think that any of those are fine, but I love that. I love to be able to feel completed and to feel like I'm kind of launching them into the world and that they feel satisfied and are proud of what they've done in therapy. And that's my ideal ending.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. And I think it comes down to just communicating with your therapist, whether it's, you know, sometimes if it's something that's not getting met, then communicating that so your therapist can change course if needed.
Yeah.
But again, you know, we are of things we've, you know, of course we hear a lot, right? Oh, I'm done. I've gotten my goals. Like, I feel like I'm good now. Like, that's what we want for everyone to say eventually, right? So I don't feel bad for us. Like, we'll be okay. You know what I mean? And like, we're meant to, you know, get you to where you want to be. And then I kind of view therapy as something that you can take a break from and come back to at any point. I think there's a phase in life, you do the work, you got what you needed. And maybe 2 years later, you're like, oh, need to go back. Call me. Right? It's cool. Like, take your break. I actually enjoy the clients cycling in and out because I want them to put their skills to use and see that they can. And if you're stuck or you're struggling or life gives you something that you're struggling to manage, call me up, right? But yeah, there's never hard feelings for me when someone's like, I think I'm done. Like, yes, good. Like, you know, so just talk to us, because when you ghost us, I think we worry. I worry. I'm like, what happened, right? So just if you're done, you're done.
Yeah. Okay.
Those were our questions.
Good. Okay, we did that pretty fast. So, and as usual, we're like, oh, there's so much we could say about this, but blah blah blah. So, but we did a good job of kind of hitting the highlights of the most frequently asked questions for therapists, and that's it for today.
Yeah, if you have any more questions, you can comment on our social media, and we will answer more questions. I like answering questions.
I do too. I think it's super fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I am Claudia. You can find me at Mighty Oak Parenting on Instagram, Facebook, and my website. Yes. And Katie is half of Rob and Katie Truax.
I am
The Katie half.
the better half. Just kidding.
And also on Instagram, Facebook, and we're not on TikTok.
We are not on TikTok.
Not anywhere but TikTok.
Yep. Okay, we'll catch you guys next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye.